This is Building a Sustainable Future, Conversations with Alaskans. Governor Bill Walker has invited Alaskans from across the state to convene at the University of Alaska Fairbanks and participate in presentations and facilitated discussions on how to put our state on a sound financial footing in the years to come. The conversation has focused on two areas of discussion: what government programs do we value and how much are we willing to pay for them? And what are our options for making up the budget shortfall and funding the government we want? Resource materials informing these discussions are available at 360north.org. In the final breakout session, conversation participants return to their small stakeholder groups to address 4 questions. What are your takeaways from the closing fiscal gap exercise? From a revenue perspective, what is the right first step to close our budget gap? How can we engage as many Alaskans as possible in fiscal gap conversation? What are your overall highlights from the event? We'll hear summaries of these discussions in a moment as the full group reconvenes for the final plenary session of the program in the ballroom of the Wood Center here at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Broadcast of Building a Sustainable Future, Conversations with Alaskans is made possible by support from the State of Alaska Office of the Governor.
Good afternoon, and welcome to everyone gathering here in Fairbanks, as well as those of you joining us on ARCS, 360 North statewide TV, and online. I'm Brian Rogers. I had the pleasure of spending the weekend with all of you as we kicked off Building a Sustainable Future, Conversations with Alaskans, here on the Fairbanks campus of the University of Alaska Fairbanks. We wrangled with the right size of government, with our values, with the fiscal gap. This morning, participants had the opportunity to talk about all of the revenue options and to use the new interactive economic model that the Alaska Department of Revenue designed so that everyone, from the general public, the legislature, the governor, can look at the options available to us to build a sustainable future. This is an exercise in democracy. That's a quote from Constitutional Convention delegate Vic Fisher earlier today. An exercise in democracy in the opportunity for the public to make decisions, to make recommendations, to talk about what are the choices available to us as Alaskans. And in this, our final session, participants had conversations in small groups around 4 questions. What are your takeaways from the Closing the Fiscal Gap exercise? From a revenue perspective, what's the right step to close our budget gap? How can we engage as many Alaskans as possible in this fiscal gap conversation? And what are your highlights from this event? So the groups each selected a spokesperson, and I'll ask the spokespeople to come and line up over here to my right, your left, and we'll have an opportunity to hear from some of the spokespeople, as many as we can, about what came out of those groups. Now, in addition, several organizations have prepared white papers on some of the issues. Those will be available to participants as you leave out at the registration table. For the general public, they will be posted online. Now, these white papers are not endorsed by anyone other than whoever produced each of them, but we do want to, as part of the transparency in this process, make them available to all. A couple of statistics while we're here, just to get a sense of how hard we worked. 46 gallons of coffee, 35 gallons of water, and I don't know how many sleepless nights as we've worked through this. So with that, I'm going to ask people to come up one at a time. We'll ask you to give a 1 to 1.5 minute summary of your group. I'll stand up next to you after 2 minutes, and we'll use the hook after 2 minutes and 30 seconds. So please, Cliff Grow.
Thanks, Brian. In terms of the first question, what were your takeaways from Closing the Fiscal Gap exercise? The consensus was that this was a more valuable and productive discussion than the budget exercises yesterday, perhaps in part because it's easier to get your arms around a list of revenue options than it is about to get your arms around and think clearly about so many units and subunits and functions of state government that we discussed yesterday. At the closing the fiscal gap exercise, there were diverse and various opinions expressed. A consensus was that that all Alaskans need to participate in the solution to this very substantial and most pressing problem facing Alaska. And obviously the process this morning, as this whole weekend has showed as well, how difficult it will be to fill the fiscal gap is a political and practical matter. In terms of the second question, from a revenue perspective, what is the right first step to close our budget gap? In our group of 4 that I was able to assemble, we had 2 votes for reinstatement of a progressive individual income tax, 1 vote for reducing oil tax credits, and 1 vote for the establishment of a percentage of market value approach to the permanent fund, also known as an endowment value model that would have, in this particular person's request, a 70-30 split between government and dividends. The third question was, how can we engage as many Alaskans as possible in fiscal gap conversation? Well, the first suggestion were forums and discussions, and I happen to know, as a matter of fact, there'll be one on Saturday, September 19th, at University of Alaska Anchorage all day long, going at these questions today that we discussed this weekend. And so I would urge you to consider that. It's useful to have other forums and discussions around the state, to have op-eds, perhaps put the Department of Revenue online, perhaps in a simplified form, and maybe perhaps as well with some more detail in the lines about what proposals would do. Let's articulate budget cuts by statewide effect and by their effect by the region. Get specific leaders to and spokespeople by region to make the push for that to help fill the fiscal gap. What were your overall highlights from the event? Gunnar Knapp's economic presentation Friday night, this morning's revenue session, Randy Hoffbeck's job yesterday afternoon. Thanks a lot, folks. Brian.
Thank you.
I'm Mo Hillstrand. I was a nurse practitioner in that wild car ride last night. So our group takeaway from the closing the fiscal gap, there's a lot of discussion about information. Yes, this is the start of the conversation. We realize this is a start of the conversation. One person said the income tax is a no-brainer. We need to right-size government. Second question, from a revenue perspective, what is the right first step to close the budget gap? Again, income tax was brought up. Increasing government efficiency, which has been the kind of the mantra here, is increasing government efficiency. There's still some discussion about further cuts that might be made, juxtaposed against the concept of value of our quality of life here, which is also very important. How can people go forward so as many Alaskans as possible can participate in this discussion? Somebody mentioned social media. If we all picked 10 or 20 people to go talk to after today's visit, we would cover a lot of folks. One person in the group said she was going to have a staff meeting and talk to all of her staff tomorrow about this. What are your overall highlights of the event? There was a lot of information sharing, meeting people from across the state in rural and urban areas of Alaska, people that are in all areas of industry and service throughout the state. Such a gift to meet people in other areas, people I talked to on the phone a bunch of times, and oh, that's what you look like. So a lot of networking and interaction. There was respectful discussion among very diverse groups with very strong opinions. So that was the greatest asset, was the respectful discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian. I'm Michelle Ridgway, representing comments provided by my team of 8. We concur that this was a very, very good start. The modeling process was illuminating and should be made available to a broader range of Alaskans. Also, 1, we must use multiple options to solve this gap. 2, the model process should be augmented by adding more factual information so the public can better contrast the options with status quo under each option, and B, to more fully understand the scale or magnitude of impact that these options may provide on the budget balancing effort. Regarding question number 2, the right first step, tremendously challenging. However, we all feel very strongly that we need to urgently proceed to educate Alaskans on the cost of essential services needed to maintain state functions that are essential to serve all Alaskans. And we add to that a parenthetical that we don't feel that across-the-board cuts in a rushed atmosphere necessarily achieves that goal, although trims to government services certainly should be, and their budgets should be addressed. Number 2, use permanent fund earnings to close the gap now, while protecting the permanent fund dividend for Alaskans. And number 3, our group recommends implementing the income tax. To question number 3, how can we engage as many Alaskans as possible in this process? We feel, as others did, that there's content developed by the media and by experts that have been present in this meeting to develop media pieces that may be presented online on the goals and process of using the budget balancing model tool. This can be used to support Alaskans going out into their communities, having one-on-one conversations. We also feel it can be very useful in activating and supporting discussions through more traditional community outreach mechanisms such as the Alaska Municipal League, Rotary, AFN, et cetera. Number 4, we also strongly encourage the use of schools as a forum in which some of these community discussions may take place, and we will look to the governor to try to inspire communities to hold those forums and use the schools that the state is already paying for. Finally, what are your overall highlights from the event? This was an excellent first flow of information, excellent dialogue among a very, very diverse range of Alaskans. And we feel the greatest value of this is that all of us in this process, can go forward and encourage our fellow Alaskans to participate in the process and encourage them to step forward and help accept some of the challenging options we have to adopt to solve our challenges situation. Thank you.
All right, I'll try to not get the hook. My name is Colleen Stevens, and there were 7 of us in our group. And some of our quick things and features that might not have been heard in others is for the first question. We really believe that in addition to determining new revenue sources, look at efficiencies and partnerships in which can take place in the current government structure as well, looking at public-private partnerships to collaborations and other efficiencies. The other things we took away is that the permanent fund is something that we definitely have to look at in one manner or another to bridge the gap. But in doing and looking at any of our sources, really taking into effect the outreach to residents as well as folks that use our state, whether it's seasonal income tax or seasonal workers, things like that. In addition, looking at the impacts as we make them, both the diversity between rural and urban residents, as well as the individual versus corporate impacts. Number 2, pretty much we were very literal. It said, what is the number one thing? And the number one thing our group came up with is looking at the revenues from the permanent fund and a means to do that to help bridge the gap. Number 3, we could have gone on about 3 or 4 pieces of paper, and I think the reason we did that is I think we are all empowered to go back to our communities and share this message. What we would love is to have a formal mechanism to both have the tools that we are given today to be able to share and use, but also a place for us to report back our findings and the communications we get from our communities, whether that's the physical towns we live in or the networks of friends that we have. We also believe that social media is something we'd like, and we'd love to encourage everyone who is here and believes that there are solutions we have to find to start using a hashtag, and we modified it from whoever proposed it at our table, but AK tax me please. So as you're having conversations, we'd love to have everyone encouraged to use that. I'm reporting. The final thing is we think that everyone is incredibly respectful. We came from a diversity of backgrounds. You've already heard that. And the knowledge that we've all gained from one another, as well as the information the state's shared with us, is invaluable to our daily lives. And because we also like to not follow rules, we added a 5th, which was where do we still think the conversation needs to be? And that is in long-term visioning and guiding that vision out to all the residents of Alaska, as well as coming up with ways to really formulate how we stay in touch afterwards as a group so that we keep the conversation going amongst ourselves.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks, everybody, for participating in that process. My name is Sarah Scanlon, and the takeaways from our group of 4, we started with 8 for lunch, and the 4 weren't done yet, so we just went without them. But this is what are your takeaways? This is a complex issue, and it's difficult to come to consensus. Many, many, many bright people in the room, coming from every walk of life, and trying to solve an issue that's been facing us for quite some time is not easy. The gas line is critical. We need to get going on it ASAP. We need to engage the public to get buy-in. And of course, the permanent fund earnings need to be a part of that. I'm just saying the things that maybe without repeating the other group. From a revenue perspective, what is the first right step to close our budget gap? We need to look at the big ticket items first. We need to know that going into the smaller items is going to hurt a number of people. We need to keep in mind that our rural residents and urban residents alike are going to take some hits, and to be mindful of both groups in all steps of the process. In terms of the what's the best way to engage as many Alaskans? It has to be by what works at the local levels. One size is not going to fit all. What works in Kotzebue, Bethel, Barrow, and Ketchikan are not necessarily what's going to work in the Mat-Su. So we've got to be mindful of that, and we must get buy-in, use our local messengers to do that, and leaders, and to try to have some kind of a consistent message across the board so that we're all saying the same thing in terms of a bottom line message. And then highlights. Highlight was having the opportunity from the governor's invitation and Byron of Alaskans to come together to provide input on what is possible. That even with informed public working in different groups, coming to consensus is difficult. The recognition of the reality of the budget shortfalls, that was quite the education piece for all of us, that there are solutions short of gutting the state's delivery of services. And there are brilliant, committed people from around the state, even those who are not here with us today, who are willing to help find the solutions to the problems that we're facing. It was well worth the time to create a greater understanding by Alaskans to fix our current situation. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Elise Galvin, and I was participating in 3 different groups, some of them associated with these particular questions, and we went off a little bit as well. But for the takeaways, the first and perhaps the most important is there are ways to close the gap. They are available. Everyone may have to give up a little, and it's a very confusing and complex issue to determine how and what we give up. Be careful not to cut off opportunities for new revenue. We need to continually look for efficiency every way without damaging and perhaps with improving lives in Alaska. From a revenue perspective, first steps, continue to hold discussions as we're doing now with more Alaskans. Be sure to include two-way interactions the majority of the time after a brief fact share, and more than that when we can talk about the next steps. And then also, the same things as others have said about what the first steps might be, and also to be perhaps inclusive of the Medicaid expansion and how that might change up the numbers. How can we engage more Alaskans, or as many as possible? And there was a lot of talk about engaging more youth and engaging more people of varied income levels. And on that, we have things like invite people in ways that you have never tried to invite them before. Be thoughtful of the many who are from different cultures, and also in your fact share, be inclusive of that so that those who are making decisions within that conversation are thoughtful about the history. So for example, Native Alaskans, that we need to be thoughtful of where they're coming from and how and why they may have different ideas around the revenue options. That there be thoughtful questions as the guide that we might all use throughout Alaska, that there be very simple language used for people like me, very simple language, and that the model that's made by the state be user-friendly for even those who are at 5th grade level reading, which is the average for Alaska, so that we be very thoughtful about that and make it simple. And on that same line, that we add a tag on that will allow Alaskans to weigh in, like what could we do that's more efficient? That way, it's interactive also. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Jack Hebert. Question number 1. Difficult choices all Alaskans are going to have to face, and we need to pay our way. Where we are for running state services is about as low as it's going to get, though we need to really examine everything very, very closely. And we can see nationwide that we're on a par with the rest of the nation, really on our expenditures. But we've got to diversify our income. Question number 2, a state income tax and a portion of the permanent fund earnings to be used. Not the principal, but just the earnings. We need to create a sense of ownership and personal investment from every Alaskan. Question number 3, Alaskans must understand the realities. Public forums and interactive meetings, the media and personal communication. We've got to be all in this together. We've got to work together. Question number 4, it won't be easy. But it's time to diversify state funding and own our future. We cannot cut our way to a sustainable future. We must invest in ourselves. We must be creative. We have to find ways to increase our revenue by economic activity for our people.
Hi, my name is Deantha Crockett, and I was voluntold to be our group spokesperson. Our key takeaways, which I think we really read as directives for closing the fiscal gap, was one, we've got to limit the general fund spending to sustainable levels. We've got to use our state budget reserves to transition us from where we're at currently to where we're going. The policies we make, whether they're related to taxes or incentives for businesses, must encourage investment and expand our economy. And it's time for individual Alaskans to be part of the solution. So question 2, from a revenue perspective, we think the first step after making the cuts is to use the permanent fund dividend earnings to help provide for essential state services. Question number 3 about engaging as many Alaskans as possible, we suggest making it a democratic exercise. When all Alaskans are part of the conversation, understanding will come. We think individuals have to accept responsibility, both financially and being engaged in Alaska's budget discussions. When we've got a vested interest, when we're all paying into this on an individual level, we'll be more engaged in what the government spends money on. We had a discussion about how it says pretty explicitly in our Constitution that Alaskans have a corresponding obligation to each other and the state. So encourage that theme in engaging Alaskans. And finally, our overall highlights from the event is that this is a really diverse group, and some of us disagreed pretty strongly with each other. I know that happened in every group I was with, but ultimately we came to a consensus on what's the best plan forward for Alaska's future. And we need to back up Governor Walker and Lieutenant Governor Mallott and our legislators, and because they're going to have to deliver some really unpopular actions. No matter what it is, it's going to be very politically unpopular, and we need to come together and say we have this very diverse group in Fairbanks, and we ultimately offer these suggestions and back the governor and his team up when delivering these. So thank you very much.
Joe Geldhoff, and if we Alaskans are going to have this was the consensus kind of, or the points from 7 folks, if we're going to have a sustainable future, all of us, whether we live in Hyder or all the way to Barrow and every place in between, we are going to have to work together to create that sustainable future. And the sustainable future first requires some shared pain, and we are not going to be able to tap into revenue without first engaging in some more cutting. That's absolutely essential to set the foundation. It seems to be the talking point that was coming out there. Once we do that, there's no single solution to getting to that gain. There's going to be multiple areas where we're going to have to tax ourselves and come up with new revenue sources for a right-sized government that will sustain and support all of us. Going forward and communicating with people, As much as we like the model, the suggestion to have a simplified model that the public could actually play with and give feedback would help them see what people were struggling mightily with here. But people did struggle, and they came up with some approaches that may work. And if we can engage the public maybe with a simplified model, that might benefit them. It's going to require going into the permanent fund earnings. There's no way around that. It's going to require probably some sort of income tax. Beyond that, it's all small bore stuff. But the most important thing I think I heard was going forward, people absolutely have to talk to their friends, their neighbors, their colleagues, but most important of all, talk to people with whom you disagree. So.
Good afternoon. My name is Jane Anvik, and our group had a few comments. The first of which is the fiscal gap sounds like something about money and billions of dollars. What it's really about is the services that are provided by the government. It's schools, it's roads, it's troopers, it's a court system. It's making sure that there are fish in that river because somebody's monitoring those fish. It's services. It's not $3 billion, however many zeros that is. That is the effect. So it's people and the services that the government provides that we're talking about. How do we pay for the services that we need? What we have is the opportunity to come together here and talk about that. The first act that I think we should do from here is have a citizens group from this group go to the 60 members of the Alaska State Legislature and invite them to please come and work with us on thinking about this problem. The budget gap is not a problem of the governor. It is not a problem of the legislature. It is the problem of all Alaskans. We need to be working together to be able to do that. And there are 60 people who have a vote about how that's going to work out. And if they had the opportunity to spend a weekend like we have had, there might be some new ideas about how that they can work it out. So it's an extension of an invitation from this group to the next group to be able to say, let's work it out together. The other takeaway that our group talked about was the equity questions in this discussion. And that is that we should make sure that the revenue we seek comes from people in a manner that reflects their capacity to pay. We should not be the haves taking the assets of the have-nots to provide for the government services that we all need. Thank you.
My name is Malcolm Roberts. Takeaway: this is both a crisis and an opportunity. The model helped discussion with both information and impacts of choices. This is democratic government redefined. From a revenue perspective, we need to inform the Alaska people loud and clear that the permanent fund dividend is not at risk. It's not on the table, while the additional earnings from the fund can help address the budget gap. And I think a lot of us were not aware of that before this. Finally, overall highlights from the event: watching the governor, lieutenant governor, and their cabinet and staff work together to explore solutions. Absolutely outstanding. Special thanks to the Department of Revenue and all the organizing team. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Sherry Modrow. My points do not match the questions, just a caveat. I represent the Sunshine Table. We sat on the patio because we believe we all need more vitamin D. There were 5 of us. We think it is imperative that we hold unique Alaska lifestyles as a value going forward, that we must move with a package of revenue options not a succession of items that get picked off one at a time. The revenue model is a great start. It may benefit from being simplified in some manner, but it's a wonderful beginning. We need to communicate a lot, and we're ready to help. And then we had this amazing and wonderful opportunity to learn about a small piece of Ahtna culture while we sat in the sun, and we learned some of the distinctions between permission and consent and consensus, and I hope we will all continue learning every day of our lives. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Pamela Troop. What we talked about, that it is possible from many different areas to close this gap. It's not just from one place or the other like I kind of thought when I first got here. And someone else said that one of the things we've learned, that education needs dependable, stable funding. We shouldn't have to go back to our educators every year and have them doing this flip-flop and trying to figure out where they're going to get the money to teach our children. Number two, what's the right first step to close our budget? We have to look at all the assets. We have to fix some things that appear broken. We have to include the permanent fund as an asset and how to leverage it. And we can, if we do those things, figure out how to have a soft landing in a few years. And how do we engage as many Alaskans as possible? This is what I thought was very important about this weekend for me, is being able to talk to. I gave someone a ride back to their hotel yesterday that I had no idea until this morning when I picked them up that they were a mayor of their community. And I thought that was pretty cool. Being able to ask other people what their problems were in their communities. Being able to take this, I think the state should, our government, our money, we should have a road show and take it from community to community, whether it's just educating somebody in one of those communities to do that over and over, and host our own personally circle of influence of people and educate those people and see if they could educate other people using the model, and use social media, of course, for getting this out. I thought the model was wonderful. I loved it. I'm a numbers person. And the overall highlights for me from this and from some of the other people was the opportunity to talk to so many people from so many different parts of the state. I've been here 40 years, and I don't think I've ever had this opportunity before, and I found that very valuable today, or this weekend. And that we all have a diversity of opinions, and if we're all willing to give a little bit, that we can do this. We're Alaskans, and we can do this.
Thank you to each of the reporters, and I apologize for having to try to keep us on a schedule here. You know, this is the start of a conversation. It's not the end of a conversation, and I think what we've heard is a willingness to engage in that conversation. When we opened this gathering, I talked about this hill as Strathyada, the Wild Potato Hill, a place where thinking and working together would happen, and clearly thinking and working together has happened on more than one occasion. It certainly happened here the last 2 days, but I also reminded you that 60 years ago, thinking and working together happened on this hill, and yesterday introduced one of the Constitutional Convention delegates. Today I'd like to introduce a second Constitutional Convention delegate. Please welcome former Lieutenant Governor Jack Coghill. And if there's a lasting image, if there's a lasting image to come out of this 2 days, it's of Mr. Republican Jack Coghill and a Liberal Democrat Vic Fisher coming arm in arm together Thank you to all, and thanks you especially to the two of you for your extraordinary service to the territory and state of Alaska. I'd now like to invite to the podium the transition team co-chairs, Anna Hoffman of Bethel and Rick Halford of Chugach and Aleknagik.
Thank you, Brian. I am from Bethel, and in Bethel, we don't have any stoplights. But we as a state, we find ourselves at a red light, and I think we feel the traffic is backing up. And yesterday, as we looked at the state budget, and in some of our breakout sessions, there was some frustration there. We could hear the horns honking in the traffic. And it was understandable and it was expected. And I think that's part of why this process has been so valuable to all of us, because we felt the frustration, but we also felt a need to do something about it. And this morning, we were given options to figure out how we can move forward. And we were assigned green dots and red dots and told to apply them to a complex model. And through that process, we found that there is a way that we don't have to be stuck indefinitely. And through the words of some of the chairs this morning that reported back on the green dot exercise, that some of them said that this was the most challenging discussion, and I think it is the most challenging discussion of our time. Yet it is a fascinating tool that we have in front of us, and we are empowered by the variety of options that we have. And we're going forward with open minds, and that ultimately we can meet this challenge. And there is optimism here and around the state, because we are starting to have the conversations that we need to be having. And this weekend is not about conclusions with Alaskans, it's about conversations with Alaskans. And because we are having those conversations, I think we as Alaskans are ready to start voluntarily reaching for those green dots and generating the revenues that we need to bridge our gaps. And as you stated here about the bridge between the Democrats and the Republicans, I think that it is very fitting that we're asked to come together to figure out how to bridge this gap by the ultimate bridge builders, Governor Walker and Lieutenant Governor Mallott. Hoyana.
This is an awesome group. I thank personally all the people who have come from all over the state to spend a beautiful weekend inside in sunny Fairbanks. But I particularly thank Byron Mallott for his inspiration and the governor for his empowerment and all the staff who worked so hard to provide the kind of information that we could use. And we thank you all, and we recognize that we need to be thanking each other, because as Joe Geldof said, we learn the most from the people we start out disagreeing with. That has been something I think it's very important. Ultimate power and solutions represent or come from the informed public of the state of Alaska. This is democracy in action. And this is the information stage. This is not a bunch of proposals or taxes or unpopular things that the governor's advocating. The administration, the governor, the staff are putting options on the table for discussion, for consideration, for understanding. This is the exercise in trusting Alaskans with an objective description of the alternatives before us. There's one thing that is difficult for me because it's different than something that Sherry said, and that is the question of, can we do it all at once, or does it come in incrementally? And I've been involved in a lot of processes where our sense of fairness has drawn us to say you have to do all of this to make it fair to everyone. But the process itself operates on things like single subject rules and all the things that they have to happen individually. And Jay Hammond and I used to have this conversation. It goes all the way back to conversations with Oral Freeman before that, about can we make this work as a package? I think we can develop it, we can feel it, we can learn it, we can share it, but it has to happen incrementally, one thing at a time. When you add a bunch of unpopular things together, you make approval of that package virtually impossible. So that's something to think about. It makes it very, very important to us to at least agree on the first step and to work toward that agreement as much as possible. Because the first step either empowers or substantially hurts the second step and subsequent steps. So that's very important to us. But the beauty of this is it's been a listening session, it's been a learning session, and my ears feel good, and I've said less.
And now, please welcome the Lieutenant Governor of the state of Alaska, Byron Mallott.
Thank you, Brian, and thank all of you. And that's what I want to do at this moment, is to thank those who worked so hard to make this conversation possible, to thank those who led it during the time that we have been here, to thank each and every one of you for your leadership, your listening, your teaching, your sharing, your coming together, and I believe strongly, from what I've heard and what I feel in this room, your commitment to helping Alaska by carrying this conversation forward to your own places, to your own groups, to a phrase that I learned just at this gathering, to your cultural teams. I'd never heard that phrase before, but it sounds kind of cultural. In any event, thank you all so very much. As a state, we've come a long way. We've had incredible leadership in individuals and in thought and in ideas and in innovation. We created, as Alaskans, the Alaska Permanent Fund, which gives us so much strength and opportunity today. We have the ability to deal with any challenge before us. We have a greater capacity to build a strong and energetic future that creates opportunity for every single Alaskan. I believe that because I've had the opportunity over the years to work with people like Vic Fisher and Jack Coghill, and the work now with his son, Senator John Coghill. Just a few of among so many that have made incredible differences in challenging times here in our wonderful state. And it gives me a real sense of opportunity, a real sense that Alaskans are in charge of their own destiny, a powerful sense that collectively we have the capacity to build the strongest future possible for us and our children. One of the fundamental reasons that I have this sense, that I have this feeling that we do have the capacity, that we do have the vision, that we do have the strength, is because we have a leader at this time in our history who reaches out to, who listens, who cares for every single Alaskan in a way that I have seen demonstrated every single day that he has been in office, and one with whom I am so proud to serve, Governor Bill Walker.
Thank you, Byron. Thank you, Alaska, for letting us do what we do. First, let me introduce my dorm roommate, our First Lady, Donna Walker. I got here a few days early so I could pick out which bed I wanted in the room and not. So it has been an honor to be a part of this process. It's a dream we had months ago. We said, what if we had a conversation? What if we had it in Fairbanks? Would anybody come? You know, could it happen? And it happened in spades. It was awesome what has taken place this weekend. One of the luxuries that I had and Byron had is we're able to float between the different groups and go in and listen for a while, and then the hardest part was to pull ourselves away and go to a different group, because we just get sort of involved in the discussion that was going on. Is really tough. What I enjoyed, a couple of things in going into the different groups, was some of the favorite things I heard was, my favorite one was probably when someone would say, well, I can't believe I'm agreeing with such and such. And there was a fair amount of that. And that was great. That was great. That was that discussion, that dialogue. It got a little bit, you know, a little bit intense occasionally, and that was good. At first, there were a little bit of sandbags going around trying to protect one particular turf, and after a while, the sandbags went away, and some felt that they had red dots on them, and then they discovered everybody had red dots on them. So that wasn't the issue. It's the conversation. And Jill Glanhoff is right. We need to have a conversation with those that may not agree with us. And that's what we've done, is we've brought together several hundred Alaskans that might not all agree with each other, but we had an incredible conversation as a result of that. And Byron is right. This is the start of the conversation. It does not end here. This is actually, when we're done here, it actually begins the conversation. You've allowed that to happen. You know, our challenge is, how do we reach out to the rest of Alaskans? You've helped us answer that question. I enjoyed specifically when the young people in the various groups would speak, because everybody would really listen differently. Bridget, Devin, Lindsay, and others, they would listen carefully. Sometimes they were asked them to draw out specifically, what do you feel? Because this is your future we're talking about. And so it was great to have that level of dialogue. We have the incredible history. To stand on a podium in front of Jack Hoghill, Vic Fisher, this is Alaska. I don't think that there's a governor in the nation can do what we're doing because of we have an incredible constitution to draw upon, and that's what we're doing. Thank you very much for the hard work here 60 years ago to do that. Some things we did learn. We need to tighten our budget. We need to tighten our spending. Continue to look for ways that we can tighten that. I mean, most groups wouldn't even start the discussion until there was a commitment that we continue to look at that, and we will do that. We heard you loud and clear, and we will continue. That will be an ongoing process. It is an opportunity for Alaska. You know, the deficit that we're in is real. We can no longer continue to burn the roof rafters to keep warm. At some point, we need to address and solve the problem. And that's what this is about. Is there one single lever you pull? No. I think the process is almost as important as the result. Because if you start with the wrong process, regardless of what options you come out with, they're not going to be well received. This is a tough conversation. You know, some advise me not to use the T word. I've used the T word. There's actually two T words. One is the truth. We're going to tell the truth, and the other is taxes, or there's going to be taxes. We're going to have to do something. You know, it helps that that many of us were born in the territory of Alaska back when we had those things. We need to have that discussion, a broad-based discussion, and I think we need to embrace and celebrate that we can do this. We don't point to Washington on this. We don't point to one company or this company. We point to ourselves. We gather amongst ourselves. We're going to put together a team of, I believe, 6 people, that those that want to continue the discussion, we're going to ask you to invite us to your Chamber of Commerce, invite us to your Rotary meeting. Unless you want to do that yourself, we'd be happy to have you do that. We want to empower you, deputize you, if you will, to go out and continue this discussion in the circles that you live in. And and if you want us to come participate in that, we'd be happy to do that. We'd like you to be there at the same time. The example I used was, I think, Tim Navarre. In Kenai, the Chamber of Commerce, we'd be happy to have someone come down and lead this discussion with you. We'd like you. We were so glad you were here from across the state. So let's continue the discussion. That's really the success of this, is we continue the dialogue, continue the discussion, you know, across this great state, and that we will do. We are a gathering of Alaskans like I've never participated in before. And we thought that the transition process was something. This was really that plus, again, as much, just because this came with you came to help us talk about a topic that it was not the formation of administration, it's the formation of a solution. And because of what you have done here, we have the pieces, we have the roadmap of how we get from here to a solution. We will do it. It will not be tough. I think Senator Halford was right. It's not going to be an easy lift. I think that we have to figure out what goes first. My belief is that the broader the discussion, the broader the buy-in, the better chance that this is going to be successful. We're not afraid of doing this. Commissioner Hoffbeck said, this is only a crisis if we don't do anything. I say the crisis is over. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Thanks for giving all of us this opportunity to think and work together. And thanks to all of you joining us on TV, on the web. All of the sessions were recorded. They'll be available online on 360 North over the summer. Those of you who are participants here, you'll be receiving an email with a survey, opportunity to step forward and also talk about this process. To all of you here and online, thank you. To those here, travel safely home. Goodbye from Fairbanks.
Broadcast of this Building a Sustainable Future, Conversations with Alaskans, is made possible by support from the State of Alaska Office of the Governor.